Hello, Resurrection, St. Michael and St. Anne parishes. Welcome to this week's Quick Things, a review of news in the parish. And then I want to just talk about some various things that are happening within our parishes, the Catholic community in Wausau, and the larger church as well. The thumbnail for the video said comings and going, or no, arrivals and departures, beginnings and endings. And so I think all that kind of plays into what some of the things I want to talk about today, and some of the things I've been wanting to address for a while and just haven't had time to do so. So hopefully there will be a common thread to tie some of these things together. Obviously, the most obvious of our arrivals is the arrival of Father Al Sloviak as our associate pastor. Sources tell me that Father Al moved the last of his things over the weekend to the St. Michael's Rectory, where I trust by this point he is settled in somewhat comfortably. It takes a while to unpack and get things where you want them to be hung and things like that. But all that will happen in time. And so we're glad and I'm excited to welcome Father Al to our parishes and to this new arrangement of parish ministry. Father Al, of course, comes, so his arrival also necessitated a departure from St. Mark's and Rothschild, where he was pastor for 34 years. And there, I'm sure a lot of sad folks, and by Father Al as well, as he celebrated his last weekend of masses there this past weekend. They will be welcoming now Father Albert, the pastor at St. Therese, as well as Father Eric Mashak, who has departed. As he arrives there, he has departed our parishes to become associate pastor at St. Therese and St. Mark. So we look forward to welcoming Father Al over the next few weeks. Since we're dealing with 3 parishes, it will take a while for us to get all those arrivals and things or welcomes established, but we look forward to welcoming Father Al and kind of moving forward. So even though, I've been administrator of Resurrection in St. Michael since October or November, whenever it was, an administrator isn't really doing anything in terms of moving ahead. And so now we have opportunity to look at our programs and kind of see what we might offer and how we might revitalize, bring, I have different talents than the former pastor had. And so how we can bring our abilities and our talents to the realities and the needs of our 2 parishes. So those are things to consider as we go forward. In addition, so we've talked about the arrival of Father Al. There's also a significant departure that's occurred within the Catholic world of Wausau. Terry Wyszynski has been the principal of Newman St. Anne's School since 2015. She's actually been part of Newman Catholic Schools since 1998, when she began teaching 5th grade at Newman St. Anne. And I mention this as part of this 3 parish video because Terry was teaching and principal for hundreds of kids from our parishes. So this is not a St. Anne's thing. The school is located at St. Anne's, but it's a Newman project. And so Terry has had lots of our kids. And so many of our parents, current parents or former parents of kids who were in elementary school have benefited from Terry's teaching ability as well as her administrative ability. So she's not of retirement age because she's a year younger than I am. And I know that because Terry and I were in high school just a year apart at Loyal High School. And so like a couple of years ago on Ash Wednesday, I was doing a show and tell of some kind at Props. And one of them was the high school yearbook. And the kids were excited to learn that Mrs. Wyszynski's junior class picture was in that book. I don't think we passed it around or showed it, but they were excited by just the idea that it was in there. The thing that I appreciate most about Terry, and came to realize this early on in my arrival here at St. Anne's, was her deep loyalty to the school. There was nothing that mattered more to her than the integrity, the quality of the school facility, the education that was offered to the kids, the professionalism of the faculty, and especially the fact that it was a Catholic school, that we were appropriate in terms of what we learned and how we prayed, and how we worshiped when we came to Mass. Those were all important things for Terry and important things for me as a pastor. And I really appreciated that the approach that she brought, especially for Terry. It was clear that this was not a job, and she was not a school principal, she was a Catholic school principal. And this was a ministry for her. This was part of her life as a disciple of Jesus. And so that's hard for a disciple to give up a big part of their life. But I'm confident that she will find other ways to honor the gospel as she goes forth, and maybe even come back and sub once in a while, she told me. We'll see how that plays out. But certainly much gratitude, I know, from many parties here in our parishes and beyond our parishes in Newman Catholic Schools for the great work and the dedication that Terry Wyszynski brought to her job at Newman St. Anne, the Newman Catholic Schools, the Wausau Catholic community for the last 18 years. With her departure, there's an arrival. Caleb Fight will be our new principal at Newman St. Anne, again, serving the entire Newman community. And so maybe we'll have a chance to get to know him, let him settle in a little bit first. Caleb comes to us from the Stevens Point public school system, where he has been an administrator. And so we look forward to welcoming Caleb to the Newman Catholic Schools and to the Catholic community of Wausau. A bit of parish news before I get into some other arrivals and departures and beginnings and endings. If you're watching this on Wednesday, there's still an opportunity to grab a spot if one remains. They may all be filled, but maybe not, for the outing to the Brewer Cubs game on Thursday. So you're going to need to act quickly, call a parish office and check that out. But if you're interested, please check. We don't want to have an extra unused ticket, and we don't want an extra empty spot on the bus. So that's the first thing. The next thing is to be attentive to our vacation Bible camp. Summer's a great time for camping. I have outlived my camping time in the summer, but I used to do that. But the vacation Bible camp is a little less onerous. It happens in the city. We don't have to go camping. There are no tents involved. But it's July 17th to the 21st. It's for kids who are 4K, going into 4K up to 4th grade. The theme couldn't be better. Who is my neighbor? Inspired by Pope Francis's encyclical of a few years back, Fratelli Tutti. I think it would be an important vacation Bible camp topic for us as adults, but also important for children. And I appreciate the idea that they're taking this important papal encyclical and obviously not going to read it to these children, but to take elements of that and to help instill that in the kids who participate in vacation Bible camp. It is a learning opportunity, but it's also an opportunity to have fun, to gain a better understanding of who Jesus was and who Jesus is and why Jesus' teaching is important. And that'll happen through games and presentations and things that are part of that week of Vacation Bible Camp. You can learn more in a link in the email. This video is part of an email. In that email is a link to a website where you can gain a lot more information and find registration information as well for the Who is My Neighbor Vacation Bible Camp coming up on July 17th to 21st. We also have a middle school service opportunity coming up in August. That is a great thing for young people going into 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. It will be August 7th to 11th, and it happens in Wausau. So it's called NCIS, Neighborhood Catholics in Service. We take the bus, we walk, we go different places around town to do important work for people. I hope one of the activities might be to investigate the new Community Partners Campus, which is a great facility with Catholic Charities Warming Center and Neighbors Place and lots of stuff that would be good for these kids to know about and maybe have some activities there. But again, this has been a very popular program over the years. So if you know someone who is going into 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, please encourage them, offer this invitation to them, spread the word to those who might benefit from this opportunity, this stay at home week of Christian service coming up in August. I read that the final directory draft for the Resurrection St. Michael directory. Final draft went to the printer, and if I remember, the directories may actually be public or print or oh, good grief, what is the word? The directories might actually be distributed or arrive from the printer this week. Seems like a tight turnaround in terms of the printing, but that's what I think I read. So that will be an exciting day when the Eastside Parish's directory arrives from the printer. Directories are great publications. And I say that because I'm at St. Anne's, where our most recent, I'm right now at my office at St. Anne's, where our most recent directory is from 2012. So there are kids in high school who were almost babies when this directory was printed. It isn't all that helpful or hasn't been all that helpful in my time arriving here. So having a new directory at St. Michael and Resurrection will be a great benefit to Father Al and I, but it's also a great benefit to parishioners, and that's really why we do it. It helps build community, so by allowing us to kind of identify who people are and who are the people who sit across the way from us at Mass and are involved in activities and things like that. So we look forward to those directories arriving and distributing them and being able to take advantage of them. Speaking of the rather dated St. Anne directory, the wheels are already in motion for a new directory. We're copying our neighbors at the Eastside Parishes, folks at St. Anne, we're copying them. A directory is already in process, and we have plans for photographers to be here to take pictures of parishioners November 9th to 11th and November 13th to 15th. Same company that did Eastside Parishes directory. Folks there had a great experience or good experience working with them, so we look forward to that. So folks at St. Anne's, you'll hear a lot more about the directory process and our need to participate in that. Of course, the directory is only as valuable as the number of people who participate. We did one at my former parish in Stevens Point that had like 90% participation of a large parish. So this is 700-800 families. And it was a very valuable book and continues to be a valuable book. I have a friend in the parish there who keeps the directory right by his chair where he watches TV, and he comes home from Mass and he sits down almost every Sunday and looks in the directory to find another person he thought who he couldn't quite figure out who that was, and there they were in the directory. So we look forward, all three of our parishes, within a few months, hopefully we'll have new directories. So going back then, I wanted to say one more thing about Terry Wyszynski. She provided in her last day on the job, she sent out to folks an article that she had found for parents, 7 ways to bring your faith into summer as schedules change. Now, of course, we're already well into summer, but many of the items on the list are very helpful, and I'm going to include it in the email with which this video is found. The first of those is when you're traveling, look up local churches and Mass times before traveling, of course. And a good way to do that is at masstimes.org. I'll include the link for that in the email as well. Terry's article, as well as another article from bustedhalo.com about how parents can help their children become more familiar with what's happening at Mass. And guess what? I think the first item on the list is sit near the front. But this is by a father, so it's not old Father Tom who's saying it, it's by a young father who's going from his experience. But I'll include that link to that article as well in the email. More arrivals and departures, beginnings and endings. So in a couple bulletin columns this spring, I talked about what was transpiring in Madison. Their bishops into the deep endeavor of taking, how many parishes they had and putting them into pastorates of 7 or 8 parishes. And so that new endeavor began this past Sunday. So over the last couple of months, these new pastorates with a pastor and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 priests revised Mass schedules for these parish groups and implemented those Mass schedules this past weekend. So that meant, I was just talking to a parishioner who has children in the Madison diocese, And they've either gone to either one mass in, I think it was Cottage Grove, or another mass in Madison, because they were the earlier masses of the weekend for them. And not anymore. Those masses aren't being offered at those places anymore. They'll have to find somewhere else to go. So it's a process that has been very direct, but also responding to the realities of the situation. And as I indicated in one of those bulletin columns, sure, there are lots of priests, but one of the stipulations of the mass schedule process was that no priest should celebrate more than 3 masses on a weekend for 2 reasons. One, and this is the bishop saying, this isn't me saying this, so that the priest can pray, so that the priest can celebrate the mass prayerfully. It gets to a certain point after 2 or 3 times, 4 times, how many times would we celebrate mass on one day or on one Lord's Day, from Saturday night to Sunday? So that's the first one, so that the priest can celebrate mass prayerfully. And secondly, so that we aren't scattered over many masses, but that we come together. And as the bishop said, to show visitors and young people that we are a vibrant church. And it's not just pretending. I have a friend in Green Bay. She asked me, and we had dinner together on Memorial Day with her husband. And she said, why do Catholics have so many masses? And I said, yeah, you tell me, why do we? Because we always have, is the only answer I can come up with. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in Madison, how that plays out. But I think some really hard decisions were made, but probably necessary decisions. Maybe what's happening with us here is a hard and necessary decision, but hardly anywhere, nothing near as dramatic as what's unfolding in Madison. So something for us to keep our eyes on, but as I've also said, something for us to know about. This is not far away, and their reality is not different than ours. And it's not all about a priest shortage. It's about how we use the priests we have with the needs that we identify. And maybe that's where we haven't always done a good job of late in terms of identifying needs and realities and then trying to respond to that. So again, it'll be interesting to watch and listen. If you have friends in Madison, might be something to ask them about, and we'll live and learn, hopefully, from their experience a bit. The other thing it's kind of in a similar vein of beginnings and endings, and it was in the news a little bit back in the spring. I think it happened, if I have my notes here, the exact date I can't find, but I think it was in May. The Sisters of Charity in New York took an unprecedented stand. So religious communities have annual or every other year gatherings where all of them, all the women and men of the male community, the men come together, the women come together. And sometimes it's to elect leadership, sometimes it's to make major changes or not such major changes in how they operate as a community. It might have to do with property and customs or whatever within the community. So the Sisters of Charity met in May. Again, I want to say it was in May, early April, early April, for a meeting, which they knew would be monumental in the life of their community. So this is a community that's existed for a couple hundred years. It was established, well, not quite a couple hundred, almost. It was established by Sister Elizabeth Ann Seton. So the Sisters of Charity met, and they took one vote. The first vote was to no longer welcome new members. They would no longer seek women to join their community. And it was a unanimous vote. And then the second vote was to discontinue their existence as a religious community. As the resolution stated, the council recommends that the Sisters of Charity will continue to live our mission to the fullest while acknowledging that we are on a path to completion. The president of the Sisters of Charity, Donna Dodge, was featured in a podcast called Jesuitical, and I'm going to include the link to that interview in the email, in which she talked about the sisters over the last few years coming to the realization that they wouldn't be able to function properly going forward, just based on the number of people, of sisters that they had, as well as the projects and operations that continue and will continue, and they hope will continue beyond them. But it wasn't really realistic, feasible for their religious community to continue on a track. It wasn't growing. It wasn't able to really address the needs of the moment. And so unanimously, that's what's shocking. I mean, there's just very few things in the church happen unanimously. The sisters agreed that this was time. And a sister, Donna, said in the interview, you know, nothing has ever, why is it presumed that a religious community would go on forever? You know, she said, we have done what we were established to do. We have done more than were established to do. And a new reality exists. And so we need to honor that and just and not just accept it. They have initiated this process now of completion. They will continue to exist for probably several years, many years, but eventually their sisters will maybe join other communities. Their projects will be taken over by other entities, or will continue to be independent operations inspired by the sisters, similar to maybe what's happened with Mayo Franciscan Hospital in La Crosse, or Viterbo University in La Crosse, which were begun by the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, but are no longer controlled or administrated by them. So it's just, I think it's a profound gesture of humility and acceptance on the part of these sisters. It brings to mind something that the German theologian Karl Rahner, a Jesuit priest, identified in the 1960s as the theology of risk. And here's what Father Rahner said. He said, the theology of risk means relinquishing old tried ways and risking untried paths, where the future historical outcome cannot be adequately foreseen. Security lies today no longer in the past, but in the future. So clearly, these sisters understand the theology of risk. The sisters at St. Bede and Eau Claire, the Benedictine sisters, they kind of recognize this as well. They closed their community and reconnected with the community of Benedictine sisters at St. Joseph, Minnesota. The Sisters of St. Joseph, Third Order of St. Francis, who were established in 1901 in Stevens Point. Their mother house is there, now dedicated for a different purpose, but they realized they could not continue to maintain the number of facilities that they have. So most of their sisters have moved to Ohio. The convent in Stevens Point, where my parish, Newman Parish, worshiped for 30 years, is now being turned into office buildings in a more public setting. So all of that is part, I think, of the theology of risk, of being able to look at circumstances from a more honest way, as he says, relinquishing old tried ways and looking, in risking untried paths. So, and I think that's what Bishop Hying is doing in Madison as well, is taking on a theology of risk, of seeing where new paths, untried paths might take the folks there. That's a lot of talking, but there were things I just wanted to address and get to, and hopefully not too boring. And I don't know how, in terms of these quick things, this is a 3-parish version. We'll see how it certainly would be a time saving. It depends on what our particular needs or things we need to address from parish to parish. So we'll see how that goes from time to time. The emails, as I would envision it at this point, will be different, for one for St. Anne's and one for Eastside parishes. But again, we'll see how that goes as well. We can try we don't have to be bogged down in how things were. We can pursue untried paths, maybe a little theology of risk, but that takes a lot of risk I'll just be saying on my part, but maybe on all of our parts as well. It's not so much risk, but just a willingness to kind of see things in a different way. I hope we had a good holiday, or maybe for some of us, it's still a holiday. I want to conclude with a prayer from the Roman Missal, the book that we use for the prayers at Mass. The collect, or the opening prayer, collecting our prayers in the collect, that is offered for the 4th of July, for Independence Day. And I'm going to just say one word about this prayer. So it's a beautiful, eloquent prayer. And it may sound different than some of the prayers we say at Mass on Sunday, because this prayer was written in English. Prayers we say at Mass on Sunday were written in Latin and then are translated into English. And in the translation, it sometimes becomes almost hard to figure out, what are we praying for? It's not the prayer, it's the translation that maybe is at fault. This prayer is in English, and I think it's a very well composed and articulate and important prayer. And so I will conclude with it. God of all nations and ages, we recall the day when our country claimed its place among the family of nations. For what has been achieved, we give you thanks. For the work that still remains, we ask your help. And as you have called us from many peoples to be one nation, grant that under your providence, our country may share your blessings with all the peoples of the earth. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.